Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of High on Data podcast, where we dive deep into the world of data and analytics with industry experts. I'm your host for today, Kaushik Boruah. I head the CPG practice at LatentView Analytics. Today, we are about to talk about a pretty interesting topic, something that today's guest and I have spoken at length on multiple occasions in the past. It's around innovation, which is the lifeblood of any industry. But in the fast paced world of CPG, it's a significant force that drives competitive edge for a lot of companies. Right from identifying emerging trends to optimizing product innovations, product formulations, to designing newer product packaging, be it of a shampoo or the food that we consume on a daily basis, technology is reshaping the way companies innovate. And to extend that, today we will further explore into how data analytics is fueling this innovation within the CPG sector. And of course, this will be centered around R&D today. Joining me in today's discussion is Kumar Subramanyan, who's a veteran in this field, has been at the forefront of innovation at Unilever, I think for nearly 3 decades now. He heads Unilever's data science strategy specifically for R&D, and we could not have a better person than him representing all his valuable insights into how CPG companies, typically like Unilever, have evolved themselves into more of a data-backed innovation, right? So, Kumar, it's a pleasure to have you here, and hope you're doing well.
Hey, Kaushik. Doing well, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. And very much looking forward to discussing innovation in this world of digital transformation, and sharing some of my experiences with yourself and the audience.
Looking forward to that, Kumar. So, before we delve deeper into the main topic of today's discussion, I would like to know a little bit about your background, your journey so far, so that the audience also understands how to get into a role like this, and some of the areas of R&D that you have touched upon in your past role. That will be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share that. So I'm currently at Unilever R&D. I'm in a global role as head of modeling and analytics as part of our data and digital transformation capability. That's a global capability, as I mentioned. So I started off, although as a bench scientist, working on technology and science discovery, enabling some of the innovations in the early to mid 90s. Doing really, as I said, science and technology. Evolved myself then into roles in sort of product testing, medical sort of marketing, claim substantiation, etc. Then I spent about 5 years in China as head of Unilever's clinical research team there, supporting again product innovations in the North Asia market across home and personal care, and a little bit in the food and nutrition area as well. In the last 10 or 12 years is where I've largely been focusing on data analytics and digital transformation. And I think I've again done a sort of number of roles in this sort of space, leading teams of data scientists, landing kind of big transformational kind of programs in our digital transformation platforms, etc. And just a point I'd like to add is when I started off my journey in this space was when big data was becoming a bit of a fashion, right?
Right.
So companies were moving away from siloed data, small analytics sort of solutions done in every sort of department to doing enterprise-wide sort of analytics. The IT systems and architecture were sort of really developing and coming on board. And it was a fantastic time to get into this. And over the last 12 years, I can see the industry has evolved, the companies have evolved. Unilever has definitely evolved in how we think about data, how we treat data, and how we use data and analytics to power our innovation. And as I said, happy to share some of that experience and knowledge that I have with the audience.
I think it will be fascinating to hear some of those examples of what you have been able to achieve at Unilever, right? So thanks a lot for sharing that. So as I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about the origination of innovation, right? So I think one of the things that I have heard a lot of our clients speak is this constant tussle and focus on prioritization between incremental improvements that deliver immediate commercial success, like a new flavor of Lace, for example, versus those that are breakthrough ideas, right? That can reshape an entire category. Like, for example, surf capsules, for example, right? So I wanted to know from you as a practitioner, how do you think about this, right? Of course, I know you put a lot of focus on understanding your target audience and their habits, their preferences, etc. But is there a structure that you use to identify, let's call it a good innovation as such?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I mean, there are obviously various different sort of frameworks in which you can sort of think about innovation. But I'll talk about some maybe kind of basic ways that you think about it, fairly kind of simple as well, right? So for me, I think innovation always starts with a consumer need, or actually more broadly, I would say defining the consumer value proposition, right? And then everything sort of fits under that. So any product that you launch or any product improvement you make that has a significant enhancement of the consumer value proposition has more than an even chance of being successful in market. Now, of course, we'll talk maybe a little bit later about aspects of execution and other things that could still stymie a good innovation, but these are the basics of innovation.
Yeah.
So I think you always need to think about the consumer need and the consumer value. So one of the basic sort of tenets or starting points of innovation could be, you say, okay, and so one of the lens through which you can look at innovation is saying, I mean, if there is an unmet consumer need and you develop a new product that solves that, that is a breakthrough innovation. It's first in market, right? And that's kind of easy.
Yes.
But as you see, in mature industries like home and personal care and generally kind of CPG, I think those things don't happen that frequently, right? I mean, you still see some of them happening, but not so frequently. The other one is you can also be technology led a little bit. So if you make a breakthrough discovery, and this is maybe more typical in pharmaceuticals and maybe in skincare as well. Let's say you discover a new active or a new molecule that does something sort of fantastic to your skin. Some of the anti-aging actives, kind of fall in that sort of category. Then of course you can use technology to leapfrog performance and therefore have an innovation that is again sort of breakthrough or striking in the market, right?
Yep.
But oftentimes, I think what you find is it is when you combine, a consumer need, potentially an implicit sort of consumer need, with an emerging technology, right? And you can deliver them, in sync. That is when usually, magic happens, and you get to sort of breakthrough innovations that really last in the market for long. I mean, the example that I like to think about in this context is the iPod, right?
Classic one. Yeah.
Because the consumer sort of need or insight was sort of music that you can take along with you, or portable music. But then it already existed in the form of sort of Walkmans. There were CD mans that already existed and were quite popular in those days, right? But then Apple sort of realized that, okay, but that exists. Now we have this kind of new technology, of hard drives that can hold music. MP3 players were sort of very nascent at that stage.
Yeah.
But then they solved the problem of how do you allow folks to have lots of music, right? Not you don't have to carry multiple cassettes or multiple CDs. So how do I carry a lot of music, and how do I source that? Out of that was born the concept of iTunes and the iTunes Store. Now they put all of this together to have this kind of really blockbuster, product that, I mean, really, I think I've spoken to many people who when they encountered the iPod for the first time and all of its ecosystem around it, I mean, literally blows your mind off, right? I mean, it was that sort of an innovation, and that one really comes from marrying, a consumer insight about, portable music, but there was a problem, which is, how do I carry lots of music without, having a bag full of cassettes or CDs, married to an emerging technology with this kind of ecosystem of a music store or an app store. And I think that was fantastic. So that was a great example, right? And within that, you can also think about what is sort of breakthrough in terms of really disrupting the market, in terms of new benefits or new ways of using technology. versus incremental benefit that you sort of talked about, which might be in a new flavor of a body wash or a potato chips. Yeah, and I think they all have value. I think even in those incremental innovations, I think it's important that people always think about what is the value proposition, right? Um, yeah, that the consumer is getting. It might be the benefit space may not change, but what is the value proposition? And and it can be a functional value, it can be emotional value, it can be it can be an association value, right? So I mean, but it has to have something tangible to the consumer, because otherwise these innovations don't stick.
That's a really nice way to put it, Kumar. So I think insights driven from the lens of the consumer and in a different way, driven by breakthrough in technology. I think very similar to what we are witnessing right now with artificial intelligence, blockchain, etc. Very true, right? So now that we have established the fact that I think at the end of the day we got to understand or have deep consumer insights, which is almost a necessity for innovation. Where do we get this, right? How do we find insights and how do we understand where do we get this information for in this digital world, right? So some examples, do you have some examples on your mind? As I ask you this, I have a couple of them. I remember one which is something that I watched very recently, an interview of a D2C founder who is into personal care hygiene, shaving razors and foam, etc., etc. So he said something interesting in that, which I wanted to share. Right. So to understand the consumer who's buying his product, whether they're enjoying the experience of this product or basically however they use the product, what he used to do is he used to lead a lot of reviews that are written by the users and consumers of their product, right? So it's very similar to how we have done some similar analysis for some of the companies. I mean, nowadays the digital consumer is pretty educated, right? So they write about the feedback of that product on social media channels, on e-commerce websites, etc., etc. So this founder typically does that, right? He goes through all of them, and while going through these reviews, he noticed one review where the guy that had written this, he had written pretty detailed feedback about the product, right? So what this guy said is that I like your shaving foam, but you know what? The only thing that sort of ruins my experience right now is that the fact that when I apply that to my face, the liquid just pours down my face, right, into my neck, my hands, etc., etc. It just makes it very messy.
Yeah.
If something can be done regarding that, it would be great, right? So that was his feedback. Now, what this founder did was that he went back to his team. He created a product, a shaving foam, which ensured that all the experience was intact. Obviously, it has to be there, but also made it a little thicker, right? So that the foam remains intact and doesn't pour down one's cheek when applied, right? So now, in his own words, this simple tweak just took the experience of using the product to a whole new level. And you know what? In a competitive market like India, where personal hygiene and some of these brands are picking up, the brand that I'm referring to enjoys the second highest market share after Gillette. So has done massive improvements in the last few years. Just shows you the power of understanding the consumer deeply and sort of using all the digital channels that you have at your disposal to identify that, right? So I'm sure when you do similar analysis internally as well, you have also got maybe a few examples to share, maybe some perspective around this. That would be really helpful. Would love to hear that.
Yeah, definitely, Kaushik. Yeah, but before I maybe give some specific examples of how we're thinking about innovation in the digital sort of world, I do want to reflect a little bit on what you said, but also on our earlier conversation about how all good innovation needs to be grounded on deep sort of consumer insights, right? And this is not new. I think CPG companies, of course, have prided themselves on the kind of market research and consumer research capabilities they can do, and often differentiated themselves competitively in their ability to do that. But I think one of the key differences between how it was done traditionally and how it's done today, I think, is how do you view the consumer kind of more holistically, right? So what do I mean by that? In the traditional ways of consumer research, it was basically consumer touch points, some degree of consumer observation, consumer surveys. but they were all done a little bit sort of in isolation, right? So now R&D would do product testing, which understood the product experiences. The marketing department would do kind of consumer research, consumer need state analysis, and so on. And the way they all put this all together was never sort of efficient.
Yeah.
But now I believe, because you can observe the consumer through various parts of their sort of journey, right, of a product life cycle, for example, and you can also observe them across various spheres of what they do. You can start to get a more holistic insight about the consumer, their needs, and that leads, I believe, to generating sort of better insights. Particularly what we would call as implicit insights,
Yeah.
which are often not stated by the consumer, but you can infer by observing different things consumers do. And I think that definitely then has the potential to generate new ideas and new product concepts, and therefore new innovation, but also gives you better sense of consumer value proposition across different things, right? I mean, a good example would be, technology travels from different spaces. Yeah, I mean, automation, for example, is a good example. So automation always started in sort of manufacturing in this kind of high labor intensive in industries.
Yeah.
But many of those forms of automation that are permeated to other facets of products as well, right? And it's really by understanding how that sort of value proposition can traverse across this sort of consumer journey that we're able to offer that. And I think understanding consumer behavior more holistically through the digital footprint that consumers leave today, I think is a fantastic way, I think, forward for companies, and many companies are already utilizing this quite effectively. So things like what you mentioned, which is understanding consumer reviews and consumer sort of feedback, unprompted feedback, I would say, social listening, just to see what is the tone of conversation. Yeah, what is the flavor of benefits, or what is the flavor of the category that they are sort of talking about. I think these are very useful ways in which I think companies are able to extract not just trends, but also implicit needs, is how I would sort of like to describe them,
Yeah.
right? And maybe a quick example in that sort of space. I mean, it's not a very recent one, but I think quite an instructive one. So McDonald's, several years ago, was trying to see how can they drive sales of their one of their iconic products, which is the milkshakes, right? This was largely being purchased by in their drive-through setups, right? And the sales was always sort of peaking in the morning, what they call as the commuter time frame. Yeah, so between sort of 7 and 9. Yeah. Yeah, and so they investigated this a little bit more, and they realized that the people who were buying it were actually people who were starting off to work. They would drive and buy this, and then they had an hour and a half of a commute to get to the office or to their workplace. So they did a little bit more sort of targeted sort of research, and they realized that one of the things that these consumers were looking for was a product that was sort of fairly thick enough when they bought it, so that it lasted the entire journey. They didn't want it to be sort of water thin by the time they reached So essentially, the innovation that they came up with was they made the product a little bit thicker in the beginning, so it basically lasted like an hour and a half. So for me, this is the consumers are now telling me, give me a thicker product, right? I mean, this is something that you observe the behavior, you do a little bit more of research, and then you sort of deduce the fact that a thicker product is what I think will satisfy that consumer need or desire for a product that lasts that journey, right? So I think it's a simple example, but but I think that's the kind of thinking I think that we need, and I think looking at the digital footprint of what consumers are doing, and and observations of what they do. If you're working in personal care, I think you should be interested not just in what they buy in personal care, but what they buy in some of the other categories, because that tells you about their kind of more basic sort of needs, desires, and preferences, really. And you can use all of that to then channel towards the innovation in your category. Yeah. So I think the opportunities are endless. Yeah. I mean, I think we're all just I think skimming the surface with the methods and techniques we have. I mean, Gen AI and the use of LLMs, I mean, certainly gives us a a tool to go a bit more deeper and faster in this space.
Yeah.
But a lot more can be done.
No, I think just on that, the example that you shared of McDonald's putting it thicker, I don't want our audience to imagine that if we just create thicker examples, be it of the personal care brand or the milkshake in this case, your product would be successful. But that was indeed an interesting one, right? So now that we are into that interesting phase of our discussion, it's also true that not a lot of companies haven't done this, right? So most of these companies have done this. They know what it means to get consumer insights and understand the consumer slightly better. But in spite of that, the reality is that about 85% of the new innovations fail. And I'm quoting a number from one of the studies that I read a few years back. And we are talking about 30,000 launches in that calendar year, right? So I think for Unilever, at least it's not that bad, but it's still a significant number, maybe, right? Maybe half, 50% of that. So in your experience, why do you think this happens, right? Where do companies go fundamentally wrong when it comes to innovation, which sort of leads to this messes, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, so as we kind of have already discussed, I think there's many parts that need to come together for innovation to be successful, right? And so of course we talked about, I guess the most foundational one is do you have the right sort of consumer insight? Is your product sort of calibrated well against the consumer expectation, right? And the consumer value proposition, yeah. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But there are other parts to it as well. I mean, so once you have all of this, you can have an innovation that still doesn't succeed in market because your go-to-market strategy or execution is not appropriate. Maybe your consumer target choice was not appropriate, and they can also be kind of safety, ethical, and other considerations. Yeah, so there's a whole host of things that have to come together for innovations to be successful in market. But I like to go back to saying that, I mean, one of the primary reasons is probably misaligned consumer expectations and misalignment of what you deliver to the consumer value proposition. Yeah, and another one that you see increasingly in this era of sort of technology is, I think a lot of times companies are enamored by technology, right? And they push technology driven innovation, right, without necessarily aligning it with the value proposition on the other side. Yeah, a couple of examples from the tech world, that sort of resonate. This is Google Glass, which was, I mean, honestly, from a technology standpoint, I mean, a fantastic product, before its times perhaps, but sort of failed to take off sort of miserably, right? And then kind of more recently, there is this AI pin, which I think, again, if you just sort of look at the technology, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's a pin that you put on your shirt sort of lapel or pocket, and it basically projects the phone onto your wrist or something. Yeah, I mean, that's the technology, again, fantastic. But I guess where these lack is essentially what is the consumer value proposition versus what they currently have, right? And the value proposition, again, measured across the space of is it functionally, is it giving me something I can't already do? Is it better than what I already have? I mean, is it making my life easier in some ways? And I think when you look across these products probably didn't tick all these boxes appropriately. So I think that's a critical part, right? And equally, there are examples of absolutely sort of successful innovations which have been based on something very, very simple, right? And didn't even require new technology. I mean, it was an adaptation of existing technology. Yeah, and oftentimes you can take technology that's working well in an adjacent sort of industry and utilize that and create sort of successful innovation. So I think there's a lot of creativity, right, in innovation, and it's really you think about it as a puzzle piece, and you really have to have these things all together and bring them all together. And the only way you can do that is you have to be observing all of these as they evolve, right, constantly. And then you get this sort of intuition about how can you bring these things together in a particular sort of context. Yeah, and let's also accept the fact that the context, which is the context of the consumer, is changing quite rapidly. Yeah. consumers having access to more information, the marketplace becoming kind of more and more global and open, that context is evolving as well. So it is a tough job to produce successful innovations in the market consistently these days.
I can feel for you right on that one. So I think if you are way ahead of your time as well, such things definitely do happen. And I remember one such example, which was Sun Chips, probably, which had a very big craze in the US in probably the last decade or so. They had launched a new 100% compostable pack way back in 2010, right? I mean, sustainability was a thing, but may not be at the level that it was in probably in 2010, right? But the only issue was that that pack was way too noisy, right? So almost to the tune that it quickly became a meme across Facebook, across YouTube, and those are the days when both of these platforms are sort of coming up, right? So people were creating these meme groups and pages and sort of just making fun of the noisy nature of that pack, right? So it was intended to obviously do a lot for the planet, but of course, I mean, the end product, when it wasn't very appealing for the consumer, right? So not sure if that was the reason, but it actually had an impact on their sales, and the sales for that brand had dipped significantly for the next 2-3 years, right? So that could be the potential impact of something going absolutely wrong in terms of innovation, right? So that brings me to this next section of what do we do to change this, right? So the industry that we are in, I sometimes hear a lot of people talk about analytics being the savior of a lot of world's problems, which I don't know if I 100% agree. But in this context, how have you seen leading companies like yourself solve some of these challenges around innovation? I would love to hear that, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess maybe a bit of a follow up to the response I gave in the previous section. I guess there is an opportunity now to observe the consumer, more holistically and across, as I said, various touch points of the product life cycle and their usage. Right, that's number one.
Yeah.
Second thing is, there is a lot of information about general sort of habits, attitudes, sentiments, perceptions, etc. that you have. And I think companies who are going to be successful in this in this sort of digital world um, are going to be the ones who are able to, no, I wouldn't say track or monitor, but essentially use all of that information, right?
Yeah.
Then assess the opportunities and to be responsive, right?
Yeah.
I also talked about the sort of changing context, and one of the changing realities and context, I think, certainly in the world of consumer products, true for personal care, products for sure,
Yeah.
is the consumer expectation for variety, for things that are more personalized, for example, right? So things that sort of speak to me. Yeah. So I think gone are the days where you could market product A and say that this is suitable for a wide variety of audiences. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think people, again, this comes from people who have more knowledge now. Yeah. So ingredients, for example, I mean, people understand that if you have sensitive skin, there's a whole host of ingredients that you cannot use, right? Or if you have dry skin, what are the things that you should use? So they look for that. So with that sort of with that pervasiveness of information that consumers have, and as I said, the marketplace becoming kind of more global. Yeah. So now people know if there is a certain product for a certain condition in a different market. People know that before it's in your market, right? So with all those dynamics in play, I think the onus is on companies to essentially have a finger, in the pulse, yeah, of how that sort of consumer behavior, attitudes, and sentiments, are evolving, and to have innovation, and honestly, I would say manufacturing and distribution, sort of processes that can be much more responsive, right, than what it used to be before. What that translates into is, where new innovations could take 12-18 months to land in market. So
Yeah.
inception of the idea to sort of product in market, where you could live with sort of 12, 18 months, and be pretty competitive. I
Yeah.
think that is reducing very, very fast. Yeah. So I think so going forward, I think companies who are able to essentially have a finger in the pulse of how the consumer behavior, consumer sentiments are evolving, and who are able to sort of merge some of these concepts together more effectively, yeah, and more quickly, really, and in a more responsive way, will be the companies who will, land more innovations, more successful innovations, and essentially appeal to the consumer value proposition that I think innovations need to essentially have. So I
Right.
think those are the companies that I think are going to be successful in the future.
It's interesting that you say this, Kumar. So I think how we have also been helping a lot of clients very recently and to solve this specific problem around innovation is by creating this framework of 3C, right? Where the first C represents the consumer, goes back to what you said at the start of this podcast around understanding the consumers deeply, almost following them where they are, be it e-commerce websites or social media channels, TikTok, YouTube, etc., etc., to understand what excites them and what drives their excitement, right? So uh, I think one of the major things that we sometimes miss is understanding the drivers behind certain trends, right? So you got to understand why is this consumer consuming this particular ingredient or that particular benefit? What are the emotional, functional, and technical drivers for that? So that's one of the fundamental things that we do, right? So from there, what happens is we go to the second C, which is the competitor, basically the competitive landscape, right? Where we try and maximize our chances of of being successful in that particular territory, right? So we understand all the benefit spaces that exist in that particular category. Are they already crowded, or maybe there are white spaces where we can play and position ourselves? So all of those things we sort of try and understand in the second bucket. And thirdly, what we also do is we look at the company themselves, right? Where we recognize the strengths of the company. For example, we try and understand what what kind of innovations have these companies launching over the years, right? So, for example, Unilever, Nestle type of companies obviously have rich legacies, right, of producing more hits than misses, right? So you already have been producing great innovation. So we use that wealth of R&D expertise residing in internal tools, maybe, or some of those legacy systems. So we use all of that to substantiate our recommendations and sort of produce these winning innovations, right? So that's how we use technology and digital and almost productionize this way of doing some of these things, right? So I think that was a good way of kind of coming towards the next part of this discussion. I think I just realized that one of the things that we did not even discuss so far was around sustainability, right, and sustainable ethical considerations when it comes to innovation. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of buzz and a lot of companies are trying to unlock innovations in that regard, and most of them look to address the sustainability goals, right? So there are massive, tall sustainability goals across companies that I can see right now. What are your thoughts on this, right? So how, when you think about innovation and then sustainable innovation, so how do companies sort of cater to both of these at the same time?
Yeah, yeah. So the way I like to think about it is, so sustainability as a theme, and then some of the ethical sort of issues. For example, animal testing,
Yeah.
and things like that, which are also quite sort of big in the industry at the moment. Um, these used to be, so if you hark back sort of 20-25 years ago,
Hmm.
these used to be business value, right? So, or corporate value. So this would be part of the company's sort of ESG goals, yeah, and they were corporate values, social values, etc. What I think is happening, very, very obviously now, and in an accelerated ways, those are quickly becoming consumer value propositions as well, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
reason is because the new generation, so the Gen Zs and the I guess the Gen Alphas. I mean, they are very much attuned to the whole concept of global warming, things that are happening around us, and the need for us to take action to at least minimize the deterioration of the planet and the climate, right? So basically, I think that, and you can see that happening, yeah. So now, where previously, sustainability, sort of, statements, where largely, you would see them in company, corporate presentations, maybe in their sort of end of the year review presentations, to shareholders and so on. And now you start seeing them on products, right? So, sustainability, so claims around sustainable packaging, claims around animal testing. So this claim on PETA, or free from animal testing, or against animal cruelty. I mean, those are becoming more and more sort of mainstream now. You can see that sort of adaptation that is happening, in the industry.
I would like to sort of just ask you something which is slightly difficult in this context, right? So you talk about business value to consumer value. I think you're right? So the consumers are evolving, and some of these Gen Z, Gen Alpha actually represent certain values, and they would want to see brands sort of producing products which address those values, right? Now, oftentimes what happens is there's this dilemma of creating sustainable products which are good, but then you also are looking at value for money, right? So especially in this cost conscious economy, I think there's always this tussle between producing sustainable products versus producing something which is very, very appealing to the consumer who's only looking for, let's say, value for money products, right? So what do you think on that, from that lens?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So I think while I said, that it's becoming a consumer value proposition, and therefore, companies are trying to obviously communicate and utilize that. I think the struggle is how do you convert that into a proper consumer value proposition, right? And as I said, so it's not obvious that, making claims on sustainability is making products that much more value added to all segments of the consumers, right? So there's a bit of that sort of struggle that companies are going through to see how do they, quote unquote, really monetize or valuate the sort of proposition around, things like sustainability, human rights, maybe another example.
Yeah.
We talked about cruelty free, and those concepts, yeah. And I think one of the things we have done some research with some of our sort of partners, and one of the things we are sort of starting to see is, at the moment, there is a bit of a dichotomy in the consumer segment, right? So the millennials and the Gen Ys, I mean, they are interested in the concept. They like companies who mention this, but are not necessarily willing to maybe pay more for those benefits. Yeah, so that value proposition is sort of sentimental, but not sort of being translated into kind of actual money on the table, let's say. While I guess you go down a little bit to the more kind of recent generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, etc., you start to see that they are much more strident about these things, right? And and there are very clear cases where they choose brands that talk about sustainability and and climate and so on versus other brands. But they are not the ones necessarily with a lot of that sort of disposable income and making those choices at the moment. But what you clearly see is, I mean, that is the direction in which the market is going. So companies will be amiss if they are not sort of preparing for that, right? And are not thinking about that as a key part of their innovation strategies. I guess the struggle at the moment in the market is the execution is not always very easy, yeah, because of this sort of a little bit of this sort of dichotomy in the targets in the market, right?
No, absolutely. I think the fact that this group is just getting started to work and maybe earning their first income, etc., it's very important for brands to cater to them. I mean, because you catch hold of some of these audiences early in their journey, and then they stay with your brand throughout, right? So it's very important from that lens as well. One important thing that sort of came to my mind as you spoke about this, right? In fact, this is an example from Unilever itself. Uh, Surf capsules, for example, right? I mean, I think what Surf capsules has managed to do is it's creating an environment where this gap between sustainable innovation and efficiency is only getting narrower, right? So with Surf capsules, what you're able to do is you are able to reduce obviously water wastage, which is a really great thing that you're doing to the planet. But at the same time, what you're also doing is enhancing efficiency of the product that you're using, right? So you are doing away with all the messy nature of, let's say, using a limited amount of liquid detergent with the water that you need to use. I think all of that simply goes away, right? With you just introducing a capsule in your washing machine and just get things done for you, right? So I think more and more as we progress, companies would look to reduce this sort of a gap, the dichotomy that you just spoke about. I think it will just converge at a point that you do sustainable innovation and you also get these efficient and performance centric products as well, right? So that's how I think about this. uh, so great. I think we are heading towards the end of our discussion, Kumar. We covered some really important topics today around consumer needs, alignment of innovation goals for the business, etc., and how our future evolves, etc. So, wanted to maybe spend the last section only around maybe what does the future entails for us, right? So, how do you think businesses can continue creating these winning products, as we call them, with newer digital channels like social commerce, like live e-commerce, etc., etc., and with consumers changing their mind almost. I mean, it's just that every 6 months you have consumers trying new products, right? So those days of stickiness, loyalty maybe are fading away a little bit. So in this fast changing environment, how do you sort of plan the future, right? And how's you being part of the Unilever R&D team, how are you strategizing to stay ahead of the curve in this highly competitive landscape, right? So
Yeah. So one of the conversations, that's sort of very rife within Unilever and organizations like us is, I mean, we are at the end of the day still a company that manufactures physical products and consumers use our physical products, right? So we're not a so what does digital transformation mean for us? So the digital transformation for companies like us really means how do we embrace digital technology tools, analytics, including AI, Gen AI, etc., to essentially bring better consumer value products to the market, right? On a constant basis, right? And then we've talked about some of the principles of how we can do that. Which is observing consumers kind of more holistically, having a finger on the pulse of what is happening, understanding your competitors better, through sort of what I would call as pervasive monitoring, and using all of that to respond quickly. Yeah. And I think that last part about sort of being able to innovate quickly and respond quickly, and perhaps I think where the market is also headed towards is sort of smaller and smaller sort of what you would call as hyper segmentation of the market, right? I know we talked about consumers wanting things that speak to them, right? So that addresses their specific concern, their specific sort of lifestyle, and I think companies, and therefore I mean, it's almost like a canvas of many levers, right? And the way I would think about it is traditionally, it's not that we didn't know these levers didn't exist, but we almost had no way to get any information of how we can turn some of these levers, right? So
right.
for example, what consumers did inside their homes, right, was completely invisible to people. But now, with some of these connected devices and so on, you know what they're doing, even when they're inside their homes, right? So I think companies who can really embrace this idea of there's so much data about consumers and their behavior that's available. How do you utilize them, and then how do you sort of put them together in context to come up with sort of new ideas? And so that's the I guess the ideation side of it. But equally, you have to be nimble on the supply, the manufacturing and the supply side, yeah, because again,
Yeah.
traditional sort of ways of manufacturing on sort of big lines, high volume products. I mean, they still have a place, but I think you need companies need to build into that the ability to kind of also have manufacturing be more agile and more responsive, right, to these smaller segments in the market. And I think yeah, I mean they and you can see how aspects of digital tech, automation, data analytics. I mean, they essentially play a role across all of these spaces, yeah. And companies who sort of invest in the foundations for these, and then creatively use them across sort of high impact sort of business value use cases are the ones who are going to be sort of successful in the market.
Right, right. I mean, you're absolutely right on that, Kumar. I think the excess of internet and social channels with influencers, nano influencers, all of them increasing as we speak, the consumer obviously is becoming more and more educated and informed about the choices they make. And it's only important for the brands to sort of take a note of that and definitely keep that in mind when it comes to creating products that make a difference to all of their lives, right? So that's how we will end today's discussion. I think it was a fascinating one, Kumar. A huge thank you to you for sharing all your incredible knowledge and experience. I think your frameworks and insights on how data is driving innovation in this industry was, in my opinion, truly remarkable. I hope our listeners found today's discussion as enlightening as I did. So stay tuned for more episodes as we continue to explore the transformative power of data and analytics across various industries. Today's was CPG. So don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And remember, stay curious, stay innovative, and stay high on data. This is Kaushik Boruah signing off.